This is a talk about my concerns over DEI, but DEI may also be extrapolated to many other forms of ideological issues, as my thoughts still hold true for many other such forms. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sadly, these words rarely mean what you think when companies and governments implement DEI strategies. This is chiefly because it is foolish to enforce a solution upon a problem that does not actually exist. Certainly, there are people who do not pay enough attention to minority groups who suffer. I am not suggesting that the world is perfectly balanced, but therein lies the problem. Perfectly balanced. DEI wants to achieve a state of perfect outcome for its selected minorities of interest, which can never be attained, not because we are all too indifferent, but because that's not how reality works. A utopia isn't possible, and prosperity for some will always result in hardship for those people from which prosperity was earned. That's why most of us value the merit of someone's capabilities. We already understand that people have many differences: their race, sex, culture, politics, etc. So we create the most level playing field possible by rewarding those that work hard to improve their skills and bring value to their communities or chosen markets. This ethos transcends all of our differences, as it means no matter what your circumstances are, there are a myriad of ways for you to improve yourself and prosper if you bring value. That's called equal opportunity, and it is something we already have in abundance within our developed world. It's not perfect, of course. There are a lot of hurdles, such as corruption, nepotism, manipulation, and a host of many other human traits that block or hinder the path of others. But we all have equal opportunity to overcome those hurdles in most cases. DEI can be a worthy lobbying tool for people being overlooked, such as those with disabilities, but all too often DEI is being implemented in ways which are eroding our ability to prosper within our economy and prosper socially. I have made some bold statements which will already have boiled the blood of many, so I now need to explain where my thoughts come from. I first need to go back in time and tell you a bit more about myself, as I think this is important. From as early as around 7 years old, I understood things about the world that few other children at that age would be thinking about. I have an autistic mind, but I didn't know that I was autistic until much later in life. I could see many things that few others would look for, and this difference in my depths of perception continues today. I understood from the moment my mind was developed enough to ponder my place in the universe that everything is a sum of parts. Every object is made up of other objects. Now, at first, you might be thinking, so what? You are right. Why get so excited over that observation? Well, I was curious about why certain objects came into existence, whereas others would not. What decides possible and impossible? Then also, what decides how long the possible can thrive? The answer is that we inhabit an emergent universe built upon some very simple base rules that aggregate into unimaginable complexity. Tiny objects have rather fixed rules, but when they coalesce in exceedingly complex ways, emergent structure and function arise, which gives rise to objects that become useful to each other through the passage of time. The interlocking aspects of emergence emanating from all things creates the reasonably balanced reality that we witness on a daily basis. Things interact, persist and degrade as we would expect. Positives overcome negatives, good pushes back evil, birth replaces death, creation replaces destruction, etc. These systems are all fundamentally based on emergence, and things persist when they have sufficient fitness to enable them to thrive. Think of fitness as a characteristic that permits a continuity of existence long enough to replicate or replace whatever resources are required to persist. So where on earth am I heading with this notion of emergence? I'm going to explain why complicated objects within complex systems are too complicated to be managed artificially, and when they become managed in such an artificial manner, they frequently falter because the act of managing the balance of a system disrupts the intricate interactions that emergently gave function to the interlocking objects thriving within it. Thus, a system that arose from emergence is not likely to be able to sustain itself when non-emergent controls are introduced. Now in steps the arrogance of our human controls. How often have we witnessed in our recent recorded history that the actions of humans seeking to control their world have resulted in endless problems. For instance, we have devastated natural habitats to quench an appetite for expansion. But that hunger is only being served parasitically and is completely unsustainable. We are just emptying the bank account of nature without adding much back to regrow and adapt. Similarly, we invent medicines that decimate diseases in ways which undermine our own immune systems, leaving our bodies untrained to tackle evolved diseases that have overcome the medicines. Our thirst to conquer and control our world usually ends up creating many more problems to solve. We lasted millions of years merely relying on respecting our place in nature, but more recently we have exploded our growth across the planet by respecting our technologies, forgetting to ensure those technologies fit within the scope of a system based upon emergence. Now that I have explained the importance of emergence as being fundamental to our reality, I now need to tie it back to the topic of this talk. In fact, the reason why I've gone back to such a fundamental force is because it applies to so many things, and not just how we should think about DEI. My aim is to somehow transfer whatever understanding I have so that you can use it to enhance your own understanding and take from my words whatever you feel is useful. DEI is failing us because it undermines the reality that diversity is emergent, equity is emergent, and inclusivity is emergent. A body of people grows naturally over time, adding to it those persons that have merit, which sustains the group. The diversity of the group may have perceived imbalances, such as more male than female or more white than black, but this is not because of persecution, although sometimes in our history persecution has played a part. It is an emergent diversity which just happens to have a certain composition due to a myriad of highly intricate forces that have generated sufficient collective fitness to permit the group to thrive. To take an ideological viewpoint and declare that more people of one gender should be represented than another is only valid if that unrepresented gender exhibits the capability to perform whatever actions it has been deprived of. This is where the importance of merit and equal opportunity arise. If we sense an imbalance, we must ensure that merit exists and that it has opportunity. This is how we permit emergence to thrive. However, when we look to generate equal outcome, we are expecting a fitness to emerge from unproven merit. DEI frequently addresses the difficulties experienced by minorities, by having us feel that because a minority exists, it is being discriminated against. This could not be further from the truth. Minorities are an essential part of reality. They are the richness of diversity that may one day have more proliferation due to their characteristics. And they certainly add function to the fitness, but they are not necessarily the persecuted class of things. Don't let the existence of a minority automatically lead you to conclude that it suffers. You need more information, and you definitely need to evaluate what merit the minority brings to the emergent equation. The equity aspect of DEI is about treating everyone fairly and equally. This is impossible, as everyone has different capabilities and attitudes that achieve varying levels of merit that contributes towards the group. Our mistake is to enforce equity where it has not been earned, as this degrades the effort being made by others who make up the deficit in merit. There is certainly room for compassion for those who are unfortunate and cannot generate much merit. But the more merit you drain from those that make it, the less fitness your group has. We need to be careful that equity does not just become an ideology where we divide up everything equally. It has to be earned, or earned and then given freely. When DEI forces people to give up their merit to support others, that doesn't fit their own ideology, those persons may leave the group and take skills with them that cause the group to harmfully increase its merit deficit. Inclusivity is another noble aspect of DEI that is frequently implemented poorly. People should be able to feel connected and respected, but again, this is only if the group as a whole feel that the person adds merit, or the group is happy to expend merit to support the inclusivity. If a group doesn't feel inclusive, then find a different group that is more inclusive. An example would be an organisation that has very few transsexual workers. This is not a fault of the group that requires correction. The group just happens to be that way due to emergent forces. The solution... I have lost my place. The solution is to ask that group if they feel that such an ideology enriches them, and if it does, then add more transsexual members to the group. The mistake is to declare that the group has a negative bias towards the transsexuals and make that group feel shamed into compliance. This is the friction between ideologies and preferences that is causing so much disruption. If transsexuals need to feel included, they need to join groups that will include them, not force every other group to include them. I agree that we do need laws that have protected classes, but that protection should be to protect those classes from abuse, not give them power to overcome the collective preferences of other groups. Many may think this is a cruel way to think, but it isn't actually my own views. It is the observations of reality that make these words have truth. People will always have differences, but you must allow them to form their own groups as long as that group is not deliberately causing harm to another. However, if that group competes with another, this is beneficial to society, and what fitness depends upon over the longer term. Another very concerning element of DEI is sometimes it bases its arguments upon unconscious bias or critical race theory. This is very sinister, as bias is absolutely essential for survival, and bias is only ever a problem if it erodes merit and fitness. We do need to be reminded that we all build up bias or prejudice, but once made aware of those prejudices, we must also examine the merit of them before we seek to alter them. This is where DEI frequently fails. People are made to feel that they have white privilege or an unconscious bias that arises from their developed culture that is causing harm to others. Certainly, others may perceive it as a harm, but this does not necessarily mean that it is harm. People tend to get along with others that they identify with. They are not seeking to cause harm. They are just spending the merit that they have earned to better themselves and enrich their lives by generating the financial, social, and cultural wealth that fulfills them. How often do we see one culture under attack to make room for another? This battle used to be fought with fists and sticks, and thankfully we have largely replaced those conflicts with fairness arising from freedom of speech within our debates. However, when we take away those freedoms and completely disarm people from having their own choices to preserve their own cultures and preferences, we create tension that erodes merit, erodes fitness, and generates infighting and generates infighting on a multitude of levels. We need to be very careful about forcing people to coexist. Instead, we should look to people who have their arms open to others and allow them to foster that coexistence. That way, societies and cultures can begin to merge emergently. Having choice is extremely important. When you take away choice, you limit freedom. And when you limit freedom, you create discontent. You cannot demand that everyone agree with you and lay down laws to make it so. Reality doesn't do that. And if reality doesn't do it, you shouldn't either. There is so much more that I could say, but I want to finish this talk by reminding people that I am not taking a wicked stance against DEI to coerce people into doing wicked things. My aim is to take my observations on how I see our world getting worse by unchallenged ideologies and get others to think more critically, instead of reacting emotionally or merely being complicit and silent to avoid any conflict. You must stand up to DEI when it does not make sense to you, and you must be permitted to challenge it as it challenges you, without fear of reprimands. We need to discuss these varying points of view and have an environment where perceived dissent isn't automatically punished, but is given the freedom to voice its concerns so that the group can make decisions based upon all of the views as a collective, and not just the views of the persons performing as the champions of the ideology.